Week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week number 1, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. He's leaps and bounds ahead of all the wide receivers this season in fantasy points. So Ja'Marr Chase, him and Joe Burrow, they've been locked in since the LSU days, making big plays. It's a contract season as well for Chase. And this week, even in a tough matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, I don't think it matters. He's going out there. He's putting up huge numbers. He's making plays. And right now, he's uncoverable as Ja'Marr Chase, and especially with T. Higgins back in the lineup over the last few weeks. Number 2, Nico Collins, the Houston Texans. Collins has been back over the last couple weeks. They eased him in that Week 11 ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys for the most part, where his snap count wasn't high, but last week versus the Tennessee Titans, his snap count was back to regular numbers. He went out there 90 yards, found the end zone, and this week in a great matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars that can't stop anyone. Nico Collins looks like he's back to form, and he's going to put up his numbers. Number 3, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. Ever since he returned from his hamstring injury, he's been putting up big numbers weekly, either finding the end zone or going over 100 yards. So him and Jalen Hurts, they're locked in this week in a potential high-scoring game at the Baltimore Ravens. I think A.J. Brown's going to go out there. He's going to get his numbers. He's an explosive wide receiver. And right now they're locked in, like I said, big time. Number 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. I know his yards are down this season, but he's finding the end zone pretty much weekly. Is St. Brown. This week, a great matchup versus the Chicago Bears. Their secondary's been a problem over the last month of the season. And this week, Thanksgiving game, they're usually high-scoring, fast track back home. I think he goes out there, St. Brown, and dominates. Number 5, Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. So Cooper Kupp, one of the best receivers still in the league. He'll run all the routes. He's got great hands. Him and Matthew Stafford, what a rapport. And playing in the Sean McVay system just finds ways to get these wide receivers open. So this week in New Orleans in the fast track and a secondary that doesn't have much going for them over the last few weeks, especially after trading Marshawn Lattimore at the NFL trade deadline. I think Cooper Kupp goes out there, has another good performance. Number 6, his teammate Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. Puka Nacua, ever since he returned from injury about a month ago, he's going out there. He's putting up huge numbers. Match for most corners. No one could cover him with his physicality. And him and Matthew Stafford are locked in. And when you got 2 top wide receivers like this in your offense, both these guys are going to go out there and they're going to get their points. So this week, like I said, fast track with Cooper Kupp indoors. Puka Nacua, I believe, goes out there and once again and possibly could get over the 100 yards like he did last week. Number 7, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Evans returned to the lineup last week for this Tampa Bay Buc team. I know the numbers weren't amazing for him, but he's easing himself back in. And it was a blowout victory anyway, where by the second quarter, that ball game was over between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New York Giants. So this week at the Carolina Panthers division matchup, I believe it'll be a closer game. And Mike Evans, he knows this defense well, obviously playing in the division for 10 seasons with this Tampa Bay Buc team. So this week, I think he goes out there and has a great game. Number 8, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So Justin Jefferson, he's been getting double-teamed a lot over the last few weeks here, and his numbers are taking a hit, and teams are daring Sam Darnold to find someone else to get the football to and make plays. And obviously, he has Sam Darnold. This offense is still rolling. Jordan Addison, 162 yards, found the end zone last week. T.J. Hockenson, a big game, 20 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week, I think Jefferson, he finally breaks out and finally puts up the numbers where the last couple weeks, like I said, he's been bottled up with the double teams as Jefferson. But this Cardinal defense, I don't think is going to have an answer for him. And Minnesota's back home after a long road trip, so I think he's due this week for a big game. Number 9, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So CeeDee Lamb, he's banged up, but he said he's going to play in this game. And Lamb obviously has an amazing track record throughout his career versus New York Giant team. So even with Cooper Rush in their quarterback, I think CeeDee Lamb could go out there, be a top 10 option. Last week, he had a pretty solid ball game with CeeDee Lamb, and he's getting peppered with targets with Cooper Rush in the starting lineup now. So this week, Thanksgiving, great track record versus Giant DST, and I think he goes out there and has a nice performance. Number 10, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So the last month of the season, he's either had a touchdown in each game or 100 yards, one or the other. It's been for Courtland Sutton. So him and Bo Nix, they're locked in. What a combo they've been over the last 6 weeks of the season. This week, it's a pretty decent matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, even though I know Denzel Ward's one of the better corners in the league. It just hasn't mattered. Wide receivers have gone out there all season long, and teams have gone out there all season long and put points on the board. So this is a great combination with Nix and Courtland Sutton, and also another home game for the Denver Bronco team where their offense has been even better at home this season than it's been on the road. Number 11, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So him and Jaden Daniels, they've been locked in now over the last 8-9 weeks of the season. Last week, the nice heroics in the fourth quarter, but obviously Austin Seibert missed that extra point, or that would have went to overtime, that ball game with the Dallas Cowboys. So Scary Terry having arguably his best season of his NFL career. This week, a pretty decent matchup versus the Tennessee Titans, a secondary that can't stop anyone. And after a bad loss like that last week, I think this offense, they get off to a quick start. And Terry McLaurin's obviously going to be a vocal point. Number 12, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. So JSN, he's had a great month of the season. And right now, you could argue he's been the best wide receiver this season for the Seattle Seahawks team. DK Metcalf's obviously had some numbers. He's obviously put up some points. But JSN, it seems like weekly, he's getting 100 yards or at least finding the end zone. So him and Geno Smith are locked in. And this week, at a New York Jet defense that's been overrated all season long, and they're giving up a lot of points, especially the last month of the season. I think JSN goes out there once again, has a great ball game. 13, George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. George Pickens, it's been solid the last few weeks for him. I know last week it was a snowstorm in the second half of that game at the Cleveland Browns, and him and Russell Wilson missed on a couple big plays. But this week, a great matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals, a DST that can't stop anyone all season long. We've seen teams go over 30 points a lot this season, and I think George Pickens could have one of his better games of the year. 14, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. London and Kirk Cousins, they've been locked in over the last few weeks for this Atlanta Falcon team. I know this week it's not a great matchup versus the Chargers, but the last 2 weeks, the offenses like the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens gone out there and they put up some numbers on this defense. So last week we saw Zay Flowers had a decent ball game. We saw a previous week in Week 11, Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins went off with both good games in that one. And I think Drake London in this ball game off the bye week on the fast track has a solid performance. 15, Malik Neighbors of the New York Giants. So Malik Neighbors, he's been solid for the most part this season in his rookie year, but the problem's been he's been getting off to slow starts over the last couple games for this New York Giant team, where second half they're chasing points and then he's finally getting some fantasy points on the board. I know early in the season he was getting 25, 30 fantasy points in a few games is Malik Neighbors, but I think the league's caught up to him a little bit and adjusted. And also I think that concussion early in the season versus the Dallas Cowboys didn't help as well. But this week, back at Dallas, their secondary, obviously, they've been getting torched weekly, and I think Malik Neighbors could go out there and have a bounce-back performance after the last couple weeks. His numbers have been mediocre, and like I said, a lot of garbage time is where he's getting his points and not making an impact in the beginning of the game. 16, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. So this Miami Dolphin team, they're still winning games, even though Tyreek Hill's numbers are definitely taking a hit. But with Tua back in the lineup, he's spreading that football out even more than usual. But Tyreek Hill, I think this week at Green Bay, it's a big ball game. If they can win this week, they're right in the thick of things in the playoff races, this Miami Dolphin team. So Tyreek, we know he's a great wide receiver. We know he's a big-time game break. And I think this week he's due for a big performance. 17, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. To Zay Flowers, his numbers have definitely gone down a little bit over the last few weeks. And this week, a tough matchup with one of the best corners in the league already, with the rookie Mitchell shutting down elite wide receivers all season long. But Zay Flowers, it just takes a couple plays for him to have a good fantasy day. He's the number one option in the passing game, I believe, for this Baltimore Raven team. And I think this week, even with Mitchell on him a majority of the ball game, he still could find a way to be productive. 18, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. So over the last couple weeks here, and even the last month, about Jackson Smith-Njigba's outplayed and put up better numbers than DK Metcalf. I know he's banged up a little bit. He missed a game with DK Metcalf a couple weeks ago, but this week a decent matchup at the New York Jets. Coming into the year, a lot of people thought this Jet defense was going to be good, but obviously that hasn't been the case. And if Sauce Gardner is on DK Metcalf, I think it's an advantage for DK Metcalf with his physicality and height. He's going to make plays on Sauce Gardner, I believe. And this week, in this matchup at the New York Jets, a potential high-scoring game. I think Metcalf bounces back. 19, Garrett Wilson staying on the same game of the New York Jets. So Garrett Wilson, he's had a lot of bad quarterback play throughout his NFL career. And Aaron Rodgers, we know he's not 100%. He's banged up. But this week, I think Garrett Wilson could go out there. The Seattle secondary hasn't traveled well this season. I know last week they held down the Arizona Cardinals to 6 points. But Garrett Wilson, like I said, he makes plays with bad quarterbacks. We saw last season with Zach Wilson. We've seen it this season with Aaron Rodgers. He hasn't been good for the majority of the year. 20, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So T. Higgins, in the games we've seen him this season, he's gone out there and he's made plays, no doubt about it, is T. Higgins. A couple weeks ago, he went off for over 100 yards, found the end zone twice in that ball game for the Cincinnati Bengals. Him and Joe Burrow, they've had a great rapport since he's coming into the league as T. Higgins. And with Ja'Marr Chase getting that double coverage at times, and T. Higgins get a lot of one-on-one coverage, even in a tougher matchup this week versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's a solid number 2 wide receiver, and he could go out there and have a big game. 21, Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Ladd McConkey, he's gone out there over the last few weeks, and he's definitely emerged easily as the number 1 wide receiver for this Los Angeles Charger team. So last week, he tried to make some plays towards the end of the game, but they just couldn't connect. But this week, a good matchup at the Atlanta Falcons, where I don't think their secondary is all that great. It's indoors at a fast track over there in Atlanta, and I think Ladd McConkey could go out there and he could produce once again. And when you got a quarterback like Justin Herbert and you're the number 1 option in his offense, you're just going to make your way into numbers, because Herbert, in my opinion, he's a top 5 talent at the quarterback position. 22, Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans. So he's definitely turned the season around over the last month of the year since the DeAndre Hopkins deal. And this week, in a matchup at the Commanders where they could be trailing early and often, is this Tennessee Titan team. I think Calvin Ridley could go out there. He could have a nice ball game. Him and Will Levis, they're definitely locked in over the last few weeks. And Ridley, we know he was a playmaker. Going back with the Atlanta Falcons, last season he had some stretches with the Jaguars as well where he was pretty decent. And now he's playing good football with this Tennessee Titan team, and he's been a top 24 option the last few weeks. 23, Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. So Darnell Mooney, he's definitely found a home with this Atlanta Falcon team this season. After the last few years with the Chicago Bears, he wasn't doing much or putting up numbers. So this week in the matchup with the Chargers, where the last couple weeks receivers has gone off, Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins, last week Flowers and Bateman had decent ball games. I think Darnell Mooney, as the number 2 option, in my opinion, in this passing game for Atlanta, goes out there once again and has a good performance. 24, Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Myers, number 2 option in the passing game behind Brock Bowers. He's been a good route runner all season long. I know Aiden O'Connell's in there, quarterback now this week for this Las Vegas Raider team. But Jacoby Myers last week in a ball game with Patrick Surtain on him a majority of it, he went over 100 yards in that one. So this week in a matchup where they're going to be chasing points at the Kansas City Chiefs, I still believe Jacoby Myers goes out there and he has another solid game. 25, Jerry Jeudy of the Cleveland Browns. So Jerry Jeudy got traded from the Denver Bronco team, who they're versing this week in the offseason. They didn't want to sign him to an extension, and the Browns signed him to an extension. And Jeudy, over the last few weeks, his numbers have gone way up with Jameis Winston in their quarterback, where Deshaun Watson just couldn't get anything done with this offense. So Jerry Jeudy, Winston obviously has confidence in him. And Jerry Jeudy, I know he's going to have Patrick Surtain on him a majority of this game, but I still think Jeudy could be a decent option for fantasy owners, and he's easily the number 1 target in their passing game. 26, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So DJ Moore, it's been an up and down season with him. I know last year he had the big year with Justin Fields in their quarterback, but this whole offense is taking a hit this year with Caleb Williams at quarterback. I know Williams last week went out there and had a big ball game, passing his team back into it versus the Minnesota Vikings. But this week at Detroit, we'll see what happens in this one. But like I said, DJ Moore has been up and down all season long. And like I said, he's coming off of 2 decent ball games in a row. But I just don't have 100% confident that he's a top 20 guy at this point right now. 27, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So last week, he didn't need that deep ball to put up some numbers as Williams. I know it wasn't an eye-popping game, about 11 fantasy points in PPR leagues, but this week in a matchup versus the Chicago Bears, where their defense has struggled over the last 5 weeks of the season, I think J-Mo, he could go out there, have a nice game. Him and Jared Goff have a good rapport, and arguably he's the number 2 target in the passing game, where Sam Laporte is definitely taking a back seat. I believe this season. 28, Davante Adams of the New York Jets. So Davante Adams, it's been a tough transition to the New York Jets, and you would figure him and Aaron Rodgers obviously will be on the same page and making big plays for this New York Jet team. Since Adams has gotten there, the rapport and the chemistry really hasn't been there. There's a lot of plays we've seen so far. Adams is going one way and Rodgers is thrown the other way. But this week in a matchup with Seattle coming to town, where we've seen their secondary at times give up a lot of points, I think Adams could go out there and be a decent flex option, but not a great ceiling. 29, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Smith's definitely taken a step back this season. And when you add someone like Saquon Barkley to your offense, you're going to pass the football a little bit less, and you're going to get less looks unless you're an A.J. Brown, who's obviously the clear-cut number one wide receiver in this offense. So Devonta Smith, he's still a deep ball threat. There's going to be games where you don't do much. This week, though, it could be a potential high-scoring game at the Baltimore Ravens. And I think Smith's still a decent flex option. 30, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. So Shakir, in my opinion, is the number one option in the passing game. He could run all the routes. He could line up in the slot. And it's a thing I mentioned in other videos with Shakir, that about 90% of the targets that come his way, he's caught this season. So this week in a matchup versus San Francisco defense that just hasn't got the job done this season most weeks than not, I think Shakir has a decent ball game. 31, Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. Jayden Reed, he's definitely taken steps back over the last few weeks. And this has been a weird offense all season long for the Packers. 1 week, it's Jayden Reed having the big game. Christian Watson the next. Tucker Kraft the other week. But last week was dominated by Josh Jacobs. 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards on the ground. So the potential high-scoring game versus the Miami Dolphins. I think Reed possibly could bounce back. But after what I've seen the last 2-3 weeks here, he's not someone that I believe ceiling is that high right now. 32, DeAndre Hopkins. 32, DeAndre Hopkins, Kansas City Chiefs. So ever since he came over in the deal from the Tennessee Titans, I think DeAndre Hopkins had a decent 4 weeks with this Chiefs team. Last week he found the end zone, and this week a nice matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. The only thing, he's not the number one option in the passing game. And now with Pacheco back as well, I think they're going to run that football just a little bit more. And Kareem Hunt will be mixed in as well. So Hopkins, we'll see if he can take advantage of a good matchup. But he's definitely been a talented wide receiver and a big boost for this offense over the last few weeks, obviously with Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown out for the season. 33, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Deebo, he's definitely fallen off over the last few weeks here. Injuries all season, inconsistent play. And George Kittle, in my opinion, is the number one option in the passing game this season for the 49ers. So Brock Purdy, we'll see if he plays in this game. He practices a little bit with that shoulder banged up, is Brock Purdy. And this week, it's a decent matchup at Buffalo. But like I said, Deebo Samuel, the bar's been low for him over the last few weeks. 34, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. So this week, not a great matchup in Minnesota. Even though we saw last week DJ Moore had a nice game. Keenan Allen had a nice game versus defense. But Marvin Harrison, very inconsistent in his rookie year. And he's definitely been a bust where he was taken in fantasy drafts. Second, third round in most leagues. So this week in Minnesota, maybe he could surprise. But Trey McBride, I think, is the number one option in the passing game for this Arizona Cardinal team. And the stats just haven't been there, unfortunately, for Marvin Harrison. 35, Juwan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. I could say easily, I think Jennings has had a better season than Brandon Ayuk did before he went out for the year with the torn ACL. We saw Jennings early in the year, 175-yard, 3-touchdown game. And over the last few weeks, he's gone out there, had some good performances. We saw a few weeks ago, he had 23 fantasy points versus Seattle Seahawks in Week 11. And then last week, with Allen in there, quarterback, I know he only had 9 fantasy points in PPR leagues, but he's a lanky wide receiver. He could burn a secondary, and he's a good underneath route runner as well, where he could run the route tree. So this week at Buffalo, Brock Purdy's back in the lineup, and we know he has good rapport with Jennings. Starting as a second-team backup was Purdy, and then working his way as a starter with the injuries. I think Jennings in this ball game could be decent, and the 36th and final wideout I'm ranking is Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. So Jordan Addison, he's been a solid wide receiver on and off over the last season and change since he came into the league. This week, Arizona coming to town. Defense is middle of the pack, and it's definitely improved over the last few weeks. But now, with the double teams on Justin Jefferson, he's getting that easy one-on-one coverage is Jordan Addison. And we saw last week he took advantage of it, going for 162 yards and finding the end zone. So I think this week, versus a mediocre Arizona secondary, he could go out there and be a nice back-end flex option. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.